Number 14, a use permit ordinance amendment presented by City Attorney Shannon Cheffin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've been asked to present on this item for the department. This will be a presentation as to the legal effect of the ordinance. As you know, with city attorneys typically don't give presentations and we don't make recommendations as to policy issues. However, the staff recommendation in this matter is to approve or at least initiate the process to start approval of this draft ordinance before you this evening. Initiation will start the formal ordinance process. Given that this amends the zoning ordinance, it will need to go to the Planning Commission for a recommendation before it'll come back to you for final and formal approval. The proposed ordinance that you have before you requires a process or allows a process by which the City Council can choose to reach down and pick up a use permit application as it comes in the door and consider it directly, therefore bypassing the Planning Commission. It's an expedited process review. Basically, under the process, a use permit is submitted. The planning director then provides a list of all the use permits that are submitted to the City Council, individual City Council members to take a look at. If any member of the City Council is interested at potentially considering the item directly, they can put the item on the next City Council agenda. Then the appropriate notices go out so everybody's aware of them, including the community and neighbors. And then the City Council can make the decision as to whether or not to use this alternative use process. In other words, bypassing the Planning Commission and directly hearing the matter. Assuming that there are sufficient enough votes at that particular time, then staff will go back and then process the matter, do the appropriate CEQA, make sure the applications are done, do the test, do any impact surveys or traffic impact studies, whatever else needs to be done, draft up a staff report, provide the notices, then come back to the City Council for the initial consideration of the item. The decision of the City Council will then be final. There's no other reviewing body, it goes directly to the City Council. There are some considerations with regards to speed, the way that this is set up. City is under the Permit Streamlining Act, which is the reason why the council process is implemented at the beginning of the process rather than towards the end of the process. The draft ordinance proposed for initiation also contains a sunset provision after 1 year and after it becomes effective unless the council chooses to renew it. The ordinance also confirms the council's authority to waive appeal fees, and so that's clarified as well. The ordinance does not provide for an alternative review process for non-use permit items, like general plan amendments or zone amendments or any of those sorts of things, but it does provide that if there is a condition of approval for any permit, that the direct review process can be reviewed. So if you've placed, or the city has placed a condition of approval on a project that requires use by the City Council, this ordinance confirms that process. Staff's recommendation is to initiate the ordinance, and either staff or myself is available for questions. Thank you.
All right, any member of the public care to comment on the item? All right, we can bring it back to council for discussion and or a motion.
Through the mayor. So Shannon, how much time savings is this going to do with us not going to the Planning Commission? How much, it's still going to be the same amount of time, it's just we're just taking the lead instead of the Planning Commission?
It depends. What it does is potentially allows a leapfrogging effect by which you don't have to go to the Planning Commission. So if there's a conditional use permit, I'm just using rough rule of thumb, this could save anywhere between 4 to 6 weeks, depending on whether or not there's the 10-day appeal process, the amount of noticing time and advance lead that you would need for the Planning Commission decision itself, whether or not the item is actually continued. It could vary. So it could be from 4 weeks, it could save you 6 weeks, it could even save you a couple months, depending on the nature of the circumstances.
Okay. And to the mayor, and how am I pronounce this? Or will the city and council, if we're doing this, leapfrogging this, will we be liable for, instead of going to the Planning Commission and doing it the proper way, or will we be liable for lawsuits or anything like that quicker than if it went to the Planning Commission?
So you're asking if there's a legal risk involved?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner, Council Member. City attorneys never like to be asked if there's a legal risk over the dais. And so, but I will say this, there are due process items put in this proposed ordinance the way it sounds. Every applicant and the member of the public will have the opportunity to do that and go through that due process. So there is due process Is there a risk for anything? Yes, life's full of risks. But in this particular case, the risk is manageable given the ordinance that's proposed.
Thank you.
No, go ahead.
Through the mayor. I was the one that kind of pushed this to be brought before the council here a while back because we have been asking for this for approximately a year. And want to make sure that we're crystal clear on what the intent of the ordinance was to be and how it would be used and the process. And to answer the last question, we're just as liable whether we have a streamlined method, Councilmember Cardozo, or if we have, going through the Planning Commission. The liability and the risk is the same. With that, we watched this community a couple of years ago through, I'll call it what it was, holy hell, because of a use permit. And it got real contentious, and as it was going through the Planning Commission and then brought up before this council, there was some that was like, rush it through, do this, do that before the change of the guard occurred. And the use permit got approved with 60 conditions on the backside. And one of those conditions on the backside of that was that that use permit could have no changes done to it without it coming before the council. At that point, we initiated the process that we needed to change the ordinances because we now have a use permit with a condition that the ordinance doesn't allow for. So we needed that, and that actually, for lack of better terms, basically got rat-holed by employees at the time that were supposed to be doing that. We're just going to call it what it was, and it's set there. So we need this to handle that part of it at a minimum. The second part was I personally never want to see this community go through that type of torture again, to where you watched people that were friends suddenly become enemies, and it got pretty heated at times. We're one community, and we need to expedite things. The whole intent with this was if the council began to see something that was at the Planning Commission to where it was getting very contentious and they were already hearing it, that not one person could act alone, but we as a collective body could say, you know what, let's save the public the trouble. Let's go ahead and bring this up and not have to have someone appeal and then wait the 10 days and do all the notifications and cost us 6 more weeks. But go ahead and bring it to basically end game, which is here, because if they go through weeks or months at the Planning Commission, anyone, any one of us could even appeal it ourselves as an individual to come up to the council. All we have to do is file the appeal and pay the appropriate fee. This would be a prudent thing from the council to alleviate that and say, you know what, this topic is just, we already see it's going to end up here. So if 3 out of the 5 minimum, just like with anything else, says that this is in the best interest of the city, we can go, you know what, bring it on up. And the person seeking the use permit and the ones that are against it, everyone will have their same due process as they would at the Planning Commission. All the public comments, all the presentations, all the deliberations, except there wouldn't be, we do it once, someone appeals it, and we do the whole thing over again. We would just go ahead and bring it up and take care of it and take ownership of it like we did when we had to deal with that use permit about a year ago. That was the intent of this, and I know there's some wording and such in there that needed to be wordsmithed and figured out, but it wasn't so any one person could go rogue. It wasn't to take away any part of the Planning Commission's job, and the Planning Commission serves as an extension of us. They are not their own governing body. They are an extension of this council. But it is to save this community the heartache that we got put through a couple of years ago. And that helps the developers if they've got a project and they need a use permit, move it right on through. We should be fair and objective, and that's what our job is. We're going to listen to everyone. We're going to do what's best for the community. But why put the community through the torture? So that's the 2 reasons I asked for this. Number 1, we have to have the change so that it aligns with a conditional use permit that we've already got outstanding, that this was supposed to have occurred last April, and it kept getting pushed off. The second one is to look forward to hopefully we can save this community from heartache in the future. So with that, I think we do need to move forward with this with staff's recommendation. We need to work on some wordsmithing, make sure we got it all dialed in so that no one has the authority or the power to go rogue. We're not bypassing the planning commission, but it's basically a safety valve for this community and this leadership at the dais, so.
Through the mayor, I would add that I agree with Councilwoman Shaw's comments, but I would also add that what I support especially about this is the fact that this has the potential to streamline projects through the system. One of our council priorities, city priorities, is being open for business. I don't see this being used very frequently, but there are those projects that you just know are going to come to us either through an applicant appeal or something that we initiate or somebody else initiates. And that's I think that's where the usefulness of this ordinance comes in. It still takes 3 votes of the folks sitting here alongside of me to make it happen. If it happens, I think it's potentially good for business. I think it can expedite things. And I also am aware and concerned about any legal liability that might be out there. But I also know that on any project at any time, we can find ourselves in that strange area known as a lawsuit. So I think this is in the best interest of the city, and I support this item as we move forward with it.
Through the mayor, I was surprised by the agenda item on the use permit because I wasn't, sometimes with our restrictions in our conversations, rules that we can only speak with amongst so many of us. Because the process, as I was reading the ordinance and reading the report, there were some very specific, it seemed to me, some trigger points on when the particular special use permit or conditional use permit could be triggered to be requested. And one of the things, and maybe I missed it, and if it needs to be pointed out to me, Shannon, let me know. But the way that I read it, it was that only one council member could pull or bring forward an item, or did I misread that? And that made me question if that is a reasonable, language in the potential ordinance, or which the ordinance is the procedure. So can you clarify on that? Because I didn't find what my fellow council vice mayor here is saying.
Yes, thank you, council member. It would allow any one council member to put the item on the agenda for consideration by all council members.
Okay, so I could, in theory, not that we're gonna go after Dollar Store, but just as an example, that had some conditional permit issues, correct? And so I could say, I really don't like what's going on with that, and I could request to put it, so it stalls the process with that particular permit, would it not? I'm asking the question for the attorney.
It would not stall the process. What it would do is it would bypass planning commission review of the process and allow the council to immediately consider it.
But the person who is requesting that special permit or that conditional permit, they would have to wait until the next meeting that I could request this, discussion item to put it, to hopefully get 3 other. It's this, instead of going through the planning commit, and if the planning had a meeting, the following week, it could be 2-3 weeks later.
I see your question now. Councilwoman,
I'm just
let me know.
Giving examples, yeah.
So what this is designed to do is immediately at the beginning of the process, before this matter is even scheduled for planning commission, basically to allow, there's usually a path forward through the planning commission.
Right.
But instead, right at the very beginning, the city council can take it directly to the city council if they choose. If the city council doesn't, they have certainty via the typical process and they will go forward. So in other words, given the timelines, within 7 days of the circulation, the initial application comes in, as a practical matter, it will not result in any delay.
So within those 7 days, are those 7 business days or calendar days?
It's
not clear.
Calendar days. So as part of the calendar, what typically happens, and Ben can probably tell you a little bit more about this, is you get an application in the door, and then once it's deemed complete, especially with a use permit, you have to circulate it for review, you have to do all these backgrounds, you have to do CEQA, you have to go through this process. That process takes time. While he's starting that process, he's also sending basically an email out or a list to the city council saying, hey, I got this use permit that came in, is anybody interested?
So in that moment, I could, my example, I could be the one to request
Placing it on the
placing
agenda.
on the next agenda.
Yes.
And at that moment, let's say it comes to the agenda and 3 other council members disagree with me and say, no, that business, or 2, well, majority, right?
Yeah.
Disagree with me at that moment. So then that use permit or special permit or conditional permit is done.
It still continues down the trail to the planning commission.
It doesn't come back to the council, because that's what was confusing.
Now, think about this as a diversion on a train track. So there's a period of a track before you get to the planning commission train station. And at the very beginning of the track, there's a processing length of time. Midway through that processing length of time, you can divert to the city council if you want to, and it won't delay the process at all. You're going to get to the planning commission just as fast as you're going to get to the city council.
Okay?
So if you go forward and you say, hey, one person puts it on the agenda for the meeting and the council says, no, we don't want to divert the track, that process is not going to be changed for speed.
So it continues going to the planning commission.
Right to the planning commission.
Okay. Because in the matrix that is on section 85.001, there was specific triggers on when the council could, and did I read that correctly, or am I wrong on that part? Where it's specific to the city council, multifamilies that they have to, over 100. So those are triggers that where that special permit or use permit process creates where we can, when a person can come and speak to us, or we can pull that ourselves?
These triggers are triggers, but they're for various types of permit.
Okay.
So these triggers don't necessarily apply to use permits. There's portions of them that may. So there's a development plan review, for example, multifamily, number of units, where the review goes, how the planning commission may make a recommendation to the council before certain actions for larger projects. That's built in. The amendment basically adds an additional alternative process if the council chooses to act on it. If it doesn't choose to act on it, the regular process applies.
So we still have that particular process ourselves. Okay. Then I had my last question, and you were so eloquent. You know how that just kind of goes the wrong. Geez, I have to wait and see if it comes back to me. I was just right there with it. I think it was more around the issue of what if, I just recalled my question. So in this change of, tracks, it's more like, I feel like a pit stop and then you go to the other, if not necessarily, but what other cities are doing this?
It depends on the city. Most cities provide to go to the planning commission first, and then there would be an appeal process to the city council.
Okay.
I have seen some other cities where they don't have a planning commission, where the city council basically acts as a planning commission. So the city council sitting as a planning commission would review it first anyway. I have seen some other cities where they do allow for an expedited process, but it's in the minority. Most of the cities don't provide for a streamlined or a bypassing process. In fact, the vast majority don't. There may be certain reasons for that, but each community sets its own standards as to what use works for that community.
So as a city, what could we be exposed to? And this is a logistic, that term, legal.
What are the legal exposure?
I hate asking you legal questions because you're going to give me just kind of a fluffy answer.
The level of risk that you have with this ordinance doesn't really change from what you have before. There is due process. There's just more due process with the with the normal mechanism. The alternative way provides for a faster approach, but there's one less level of review. So it's roughly the same.
Yeah, I would like to, I mean, if we're heading this path and if the votes are there, I would love to have more conversation about this. Because if I can't get it clear in my brain and I've just looked at it, the same amount of time that the public was able to look at this, and you're supposed to clearly understand it and hope that businesses will find this to be a benefit and community members find it as a benefit. And looking at our goals, I mean, to be a business-friendly community is to improve, objective 4, we want to improve the process and the development in a fair, consistent manner of our policies. So I'm just hoping that we align ourselves to that particular objective within our priority as well. And I just wanted to have a clear sense how this is going to be better for us.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Just to be clear, tonight, you will actually get a second bite of the apple on this. Tonight's the initiation process. Tonight's the, hey, do we want to start this, and are there any clarifications we think we should add to this before we send it to the Planning Commission process? So you will have a second bite at the apple. You'll also have the benefit of the Planning Commission's recommendation the next time that you see this, assuming that the City Council wants to initiate it.
Fair enough, thank you.
Through the mayor, Mr. Chaffin, I just want to clarify for everyone involved that while we have the two different paths, if the council chooses not to take the expedited route, or it never gets to that point and they go through the Planning Commission, they still have all the normal hearing rights, appeal rights, everything stays in place. This is just kind of an express lane, is really what it is.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Or it could be the fast track if you're trying to get in through the Golden Gate Bridge. Yeah, thank you.
And I do like your analogy. It's better than the train tracks. It's more of an express lane, I guess, would be a
Through the mayor, I still think that Councilwoman Espindola's question is, if the council chooses on a 3 or more votes to hear the item, to expedite it, can they do that at the same council meeting that they vote to bring it to the council, or does it have to wait for the next council meeting? Because that's a question of timing, right?
Yes. So if you are putting it on the agenda, you're actually not approving the CUP or considering approval of the CUP. You're merely determining whether to use the alternative route.
Right, and then you can bring it back at the next meeting and then consider the item, right?
I don't know if it'd be the next meeting because you still need to do the seek with the processing.
Whenever it's ready. Yeah, whenever it's ready to come back to the council. Right, okay.
And through the mayor again, on when we have those based upon the limited times that we've seen that this was necessary, with the amount of people that wanted to speak at it and such, and the way this council has operated, I honestly think there'd probably be a special meeting called specifically for that addresses that as it would have been before the Planning Commission. So it's done very thorough. The applicant has all of their rights. The appellate has all of their rights. And I think the council would probably go above and beyond and not try to throw it in amongst 28 items on the agenda.
And Council Member Shaw, if I may, one of the things that's built into this draft ordinance is that there are it's an unusual process. It's only for limited circumstances. And it does say that they have to check for factors. So the council would check for factors for proceeding with the alternative review process can include the likelihood of appeal to the city council if another review process is used. In other words, if you go the traditional route. The public interest in expediting the review process and other items related to public health, safety, and welfare. So this is not a one-size-fit bandage approach the way that it's designed. It's designed for more narrow circumstances.
All right, well, thank you very much for all that discussion. It seems to be a potentially, we could be longer or shorter time-wise, depends on the timing. And I think the impetus for the suggestion, which is to provide us options under those limited circumstances, is a good one. And I liked a couple things in the draft ordinance. I like that we have to have a majority opinion or a majority of the council approve the fact that we do the bypass. I also like the fact that we have a sunset clause worked into that to give us an automatic way to revert back to the current process if, for whatever reason, some unforeseen problems surfaced when we implement this during the initial trial period. I personally like that idea. I think the reason why we got here was an exception, and I'm not typically in favor of arguing the exception as if it's the general rule, where because everything in the process has to pay the price of an exception. I think we have professionalism to deal with that, but I think giving us options like this is and as long as they're legal, apparently they are, which is great, and to streamline processes and get business done is a good thing, and so I would support that. Having said that, I would entertain a motion unless I'll give one more chance for the public to comment on anything. Okay. Or further comment, if necessary.
All right, through the mayor.
Or do we need a motion on this?
We need it or just direction?
As you're initiating it, I would say have a first and second, make a vote, and
All right.
we can
All
set
right,
it
thank you.
on the trail.
Okay. Through the mayor, I would move that we initiate an ordinance update that will amend the Yuba City Municipal Code to allow for direct city council review of use permits by amending sections 8-5.7001 and 8-5.7003 of Article 70 of Chapter 5 of Title 8 and Section 8-5.7101 of Article 71 of Chapter 5 of Title 8.
Second.
Can you do, Mayor, through Mayor, can you do a roll call, please?
A what? A roll call vote? Sure, no problem. Madam Clerk, may we have a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Shaw,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Boomgarden,
Aye.
Mayor Harris,
Yes.
Councilmember Cardoza,
Yes.
and Councilmember Espandola.
No.
All right, thank you very much. That will pass.